I've loved the chords of Clarity, I love the drop, but this together just really created something magical. The journey of my first album started when Lady Gaga asked me to work on her album.
So you're this young guy who was living at home, at least up to that time or close near that time. So how does it happen where Lady Gaga reaches out to you?
I think there's a couple connections between us. The first one was that we were on the same label and I believe signed by the same person, Jimmy Iovine, back in the day. I played a Beats by Dre event in London and she was there, and I think she had briefly heard about me, and I met her literally on stage right there and then, and she was like, I'd love to make music with you. And that sounded like I was dreaming and that wasn't real. I was like, okay, I mean, I was such a big fan. To me, it was like, of course. So I kind of just decided to send her a song that I had been working on, which is a song that ended up coming out in 2015, many years later. But it was this snippet that I thought she was always ahead of her time, especially in the position she was. So I thought she would appreciate it. And then she heard that song, and I think that song really made her want to work with me. So that's how that all started happening. And then I got a call that she wants me to fly to LA and work on her album, and like asked me to block off, I believe it was 3 or 4 months of my time, which of course, like I dropped everything to make it happen. And I came to LA. I was kind of tasked to write music for her album, but she was obviously insanely busy and she wasn't actually able to show up for the first decent amount of that time. So I made 10 songs for her, of which I believe we ended up making 3 out of them and 7 that didn't work. But at some point I had created 10 songs and she wasn't ready yet. She was still busy, and I had canceled everything and I was sitting in that studio. So my mind went to like, well, I guess I might as well just make music for myself, because I'm not sure there's any point in making more than 10 songs at this stage. So I just started making music for myself without a thought of an album, without anything. I just wanted to get creative, and it was such an amazing time of, I had an idea and that idea would take me 5 days to do. So I spent 5 days working on some random idea, not knowing if it would work out or not. This is a freedom that would be really hard for me to justify today, because 5 days is a lot of time. My career is kind of like in full effect. So to take 5 days to just try something completely random and creative out and see if it works or not is something that's really hard for me to do today. But back in the day, it's like I didn't have a timeline. I was just waiting anyway. So I started making songs and I started working just kind of one at a time, of which most songs ended up being on Clarity. And I wanted to make a song with Porter Robinson, who's a friend of mine and one of my favorite producers, and we kind of came up together. So Porter flew in for 3 days. We ended up playing a tour together and we wanted to have a song together. So we started working on a song, started working on chords, started recording our voices, which are all the like the vocal chops that end up playing the melody inside Clarity is all our voices. And we write the chords, and we kind of get through the first 30, 45 seconds of the song. There's no drop, there's no build, there was just kind of the verse. And then our 3 days are over. The song doesn't have vocals. The song really doesn't have a whole lot. I fly back to Germany. He flies back to North Carolina, where he lived at the time. I believe he still does. And at this stage, I'm kind of already well on the way with my album. And in my perspective, it's going to have to make sense in context of my album. In Porter's perspective, I think it was just a song that we kind of worked on to hopefully work with our tour. So I just kept working on it by myself because I wanted to get it to the finish line. And at some point I made the drop, and I was curious, how would it feel if we had a vocal on this track? We never even talked about a vocal for Clarity at this point. And I went through my a cappella folder, which was a cappellas I had been sent, including this a cappella Clarity, which is something Matthew Koma wrote for a song called Lost at Sea on my album, which was a different chord progression. But if you put the two together, you can kind of see where his head was at when he was writing that top line. And when I heard his voice on Lost at Sea with the Clarity vocal, I think I replied something on the lines of, this vocal is way too strong for a song that is as passive as Lost at Sea is. Lost at Sea is a chill, driving song. The voice does not have to be as genius as I thought this vocal was. So I said, one day I will make a song with this voice. for something else, which is something that happens frequently. I get a vocal that I really love. I feel like it doesn't fit. And one day I get back to that vocal. So it was sitting in my a cappella folder, and I just kind of threw it in there just to see how a voice would sound. Pretty sure it was the first one I even tried. I pitched it up to the key of Clarity, and there was just this moment of like, there was just something really magical that happened. I've loved the chords of Clarity, I love the drop, but this together just really created something magical. And then I shared it with Porter, and Porter at the time, I think creatively was going a slightly different direction than I was, and embracing pop just ever so slightly less, and he did not like the vocal. Or he liked the vocal, he just didn't feel like it would fit what we were doing. And I was kind of scratching my head because A, I thought it was genius, and B, I was running out of time. I really needed to get this onto my album, and to me, this kind of this was the center point of my album. This really felt like it was tying it all together. So it got to the point where I had finished the whole song at this stage, and I kind of needed his approval because I really wanted this to be on my album. And we just got to the point where he said, just make it your song. We'll work on another song together. Like, it didn't fit what he wanted to do, and I was way too deep into what the song ended up being. So we, like, you know, in a friendly way, was like, just do you, make it what you want it to be, we'll work on another song. And that became Clarity.
You ended up with having artist Foxes, who's British singer Louisa Rose Allen, right? So she's the voice on Clarity, that great voice. How did that happen?
My manager, Dave, so usually the way we work is I make a song, we get a vocal, we mock up a rough demo, and then we kind of write down a list of our main targets for who would sing the song, because frequently the people who demo vocals on songs don't want to be on them. They just want to be the writer. They don't want to be the singer or artist. And in this case, the song didn't work for Matthew, who I really wanted to be on the song, because I had to pitch it up to get it to the key of Clarity, because initially it was written over another track of mine. And he was not in favor of that. So, and I couldn't reproduce the entire song given the whole history of like all the melodies being our voices, and like I can't go back and re-record everything from scratch. So we started making a list of artists that we thought would fit, and Dave showed me Foxes, and I loved her voice. She was in England, I was in LA at the time, so we got on a FaceTime and kind of talked briefly through what we want to do. I don't even know if that was FaceTime or Skype back in the day, but you get the idea. We talked through it. She recorded in England. She sent the session over. And then, you know, I spent a couple days working with a vocal, recording some backings. You know, the rest was history. I had never met her in person. It was just, I heard her voice and I was like, this could be really good.
That's pretty incredible that you never met her in person. And there's so much at stake. When you have a song, you knew that it was a song that was so special. And so to have that kind of marriage of bringing in the voice, that's a huge decision to be able to do that. It's a huge decision.
And if she didn't nail it, the song probably wouldn't have been on the album. And we probably would not be having this conversation. Because my time was set. Everything, the schedule was there. If this didn't make it, there's a high likelihood that the song would not have been part of the album. The album would have been called something else. And I probably wouldn't have been, you know, where I am.
How did that come to you and your other writers for Clarity? You know, the meaning of things like, you know, when you look at the lyrics and if our love is tragedy, why are you my remedy? And if our love's insanity, why are you my clarity? How did that happen?
So the lyrics are most of the time written by either the singer that ends up singing it or the writer that wrote that melody. So in this case, Matthew wrote the lyrics on top of Lost at Sea, which is another track that I wrote. And the lyrics actually kept going. So there's more.
Okay, so that's what you were saying. So when you were talking about Lost at Sea, those lyrics, that was a little bit unclear to me. So those lyrics, Clarity, so this is clarity that's brought to the question. So those lyrics from Lost at Sea were actually then swept over into this song.
Correct. Yeah, so those Clarity was technically, if I had kept the vocal on the track that I wrote, or the track that Matthew ended up writing the vocal to, then Lost at Sea would today be called Clarity. And it would have actually, there were more vocals after the hook. There was like a post-hook. Now the post-hook no longer made sense in context of the today Clarity, right? So the moment I brought in the vocal, I started slightly restructuring it because I needed it to make sense in context of the new song that I just made. So oftentimes, in a case like this, the lyrics were written with a completely different intent. It's just that there became a new context for them, which is a completely new bed of music and a new structure. And then of course, I will adjust my instrumental to make the vocal fit. So if I had a hard hitting moment and the vocals really soft, I'm gonna adjust my song to make space for the vocal. So it's a constant push and pull between what I write as an instrumental and then the vocal I get back, and then you slowly find the middle ground for it.
Interesting.
Because I personally really don't like getting in a room with somebody and writing from scratch. I love to come prepared. I will make a bunch of chord progressions, and then we see what do you vibe with? You like this chord progression? Let's work on that. And I obviously have already pre-written something, and then we might write a really good vocal, which makes me have to change the chords I made because the vocal is stronger than the chords, and I want to keep certain bits of it, and then I go back and change what I had previously written.
Fascinating. It's really interesting. And then let's go into a little bit of Out of Time, which is the new single and the new track and your new album that's going to be coming out at the end of August, at the very end of August. So tell us a little bit about Out of Time. Your vocalist there is B. Miller, and how that happened in that particular case.
So I started writing this song in 2015, which is a long time ago. That's when I wrote it. It was labeled CC internally, because those were I just got my first house. It was on a street called Carmen Crest. And this was the very first song I wrote in my very first house. And it was just a piano demo back then. So the whole chord progression of it, the whole intro is basically what I wrote. But there was no vocal yet. And I felt like it was far too musical and theatrical for the music I had been making at the time. But I loved it. And in my mind, it was like, one day there will be an opportunity for this song to feel like it's in the right place. It's always stayed there in my career. I made a whole intro around that song, but it never actually resolved in it. I opened my shows with the song for years because it was this amazing emotion that made you want to smile and cry at the same time, which is my sweet spot. But I love that. Had a drop. Yeah, I really like when you don't know how to feel about whether you're supposed to feel this way or that way. I like giving the listener the final say over whether it's a happy or a sad song. That's my favorite harmonic spectrum, is when you can kind of feel both ways. So this song has been in my life for a long time, and then as I started working on Tell Us, my album, it just slowly became more and more theatrical. It became more and more cinematic, and this chord progression just made perfect sense, and to me was always kind of the center point of the album. Everything resolved around that DNA of complex chords that make you feel very emotional. So I started working on the song, I started producing a rough demo of it, and then there's been so many sessions that I had to do with this song to get the vocal where it is. I think the first one I wrote with Georgia Koo, who's incredible, and we kind of started writing a dark version of this song. I believe I've worked on so many songs and did so many sessions this album that I might be mixing things up. But essentially, the long story short is that we made a song on my album, the second track on my album with B. Miller. That was the first song we worked on, and we've worked on it for quite a few days. And I realized how amazing she is. Genuinely, she brought a whole new life to my music. Out of Time was at this stage later on the album. And then I had this idea of bringing Out of Time into the first slot, creating an intro for it, and a transition into the second song, and a slight foreshadowing so that B. Miller would essentially tell a longer story. Then we started working on that song with B, and I think just her energy of her voice is really what solved the puzzle for me, because now the drop had taken a completely different place for me. The instruments were the headliners in the drop, or the chorus, whatever you want to call it. But once I heard her voice on it, it completely changed, and I wanted my instruments just to be the background for her voice to shine, because to me that was so much more emotional than what I had done previously. And we just piece by piece kind of worked through the whole song, and there's tempo changes, and it goes from really soft and emotional to really hard and heartwarming. And yeah, I mean, I feel to me the whole song is just such a journey, and kind of brings those 9 years of the song being in my universe all together.